All right, and hello everybody. This is Nate from Nightingale Writing Center, and today we're going to talk about pronouns, one of the parts of speech. We'll especially be focusing on probably the two things that trip people up most with pronouns, and be diving in, learning some mnemonics and other helpful hints to help you master how pronouns work within a sentence and with grammar. So let's go on ahead and jump into our PowerPoint for today. Becoming a pro at pronouns. Okay, so let's get a quick refresher on what a pronoun is. Pronouns are a part of speech. A part of speech. Wow, somebody needs to do some proofreading. Pronouns are a part of speech. In general, pronouns can take the place of nouns in a sentence. This is true for most of the classes of pronouns. There are some that it would be very difficult to think of it in terms of replacing a noun. Specifically, I'm thinking of the relative pronouns, who, whom, that, and which, but we're actually not going to dig into those today. Those, of course, you can study in the pronouns section of the grammar book in Nightingale Writing Center on my nightingale.myday.cloud. All right. So I have a couple of examples here that show how this substitution works for most classes of pronouns. James likes the cat. Let's think here. What pronoun do you think would replace James? And we'll go through and look at the other sentences and look at how to replace the words in red with a pronoun. Kiara and her family toured Colorado last summer. What pronoun could we use to replace Kiara and her family? This schedule is a problem for my partner and me. What can we substitute my partner and me with? Not one person goes there anymore. Sounds like a sad place, but what word can we use instead of not one person? All right, let's check it out. Bam. He likes the cat. They toured Colorado last summer. This schedule is a problem for us. No one goes there anymore. And you'll notice that we have pronouns going into both the subjects of sentences and in one case the object of a preposition, to be precise, but it is an object pronoun going after for us. All right. So again, we're looking at personal pronouns to this point, and you can see that they can be grouped together 5 different ways, each serving a different grammatical function in a sentence. Subject pronouns, those will serve in the subject of a sentence. So we'll unpack something here. This is the reason that we'd say Shania and I are going to the park. We might be tempted to say, especially in casual conversation, and remember, casual conversation is perfectly acceptable when it's casual and where we can feel looser with the rules of grammar, right? Shania and I are going to the park. Well, in conversation, as I was saying, we might say me and Shania are going to the park. But if we look at this chart here, we'd essentially be saying me am going to the park. That doesn't make any sense. We need to use a subject pronoun. So that's why in this sentence, we would say Shania and I are going rather than me and Shania are going. All right, that was a little impromptu lesson there. And again, we get more into that in the grammar book. So let's look at two of the things that really vex people with pronouns. And to do that, we're going to look at a different set of class of pronouns so far. We looked at personal pronouns, I, you, me, yourself, so on. But the next class that we're looking at today are indefinite pronouns. We'll dig into them in a second. So first, a word on subject-verb agreement. In English, the subject and the verb must agree. That means that they match up correctly in terms of their grammar. And this is true whether the subject in a clause or sentence is a noun or a pronoun. So again, we look at these sentences and we can see, especially for the first, second, and fourth sentences, that the verbs are matching up, especially that first and fourth sentence. He liked the cat. We would not say he liked the cat, because that would be a mismatch. We would not say James liked the cat either. The subject and the verb are not agreeing. We could go down to the last sentence, and this gets a little more challenging because we're not using one of the personal pronouns that we looked at before, but one of the indefinite pronouns that we'll be digging into a little more here. No one goes there anymore. And maybe you don't know that you would say no one goes rather than no one go, but that's what we're here for, to learn this. All right, let's move on. And you can see I've laid out some common verbs in charts that may look familiar to you from at some point in your English education. If not, it's probably that you just learned this as you learned English as a first language, and as you came up from childhood, you learned these rules naturally just from hearing people talk and from reading. If English is your second, third, fourth language, or maybe more, these charts should look very familiar because this is often how we learn subject-verb agreement, and not just in English, but in a lot of other languages as well. So when I say subject-verb agreement, this is the stuff that I mean. And this one, if you did not have that grammatical term for it, it's still probably a principle that you have some understanding of. Now, the pronouns we have looked at thus far and the verbs that agree with them should be familiar, as I've said. But there are other classes of pronouns with more complex rules. And for that, we are looking at the indefinite pronouns. I have broken these down into three groups. Three different groups of indefinite pronouns. I've written the entire list for each one. And again, these are discussed further in our grammar book in the Writing Center. But you see the full list. It's about a dozen or so indefinite pronouns that always use the third person singular verb. What do I mean by that? It's the verb form that you would use with the words he, she, or it. So each contains a stethoscope and a thermometer. These third person singular verbs are basically always going to end in an S, whether it's a regular verb like the verb contain, or an irregular verb like have, little has been done, or even the weird verb to be. It still ends in S. Somebody is waiting. So we can pull any of these words from this list at the top to make a sentence out of them. They're always going to have the same verb form that you would use for he, she, or it. So if you can marry those two ideas together, all the words in this list use the he, she, it verbs. Bam, you got it. Sometimes I say he, she, it. Sometimes I say she, he, it. Oh, well, let's go on. All right. Next group of indefinite pronouns work exactly the opposite. And you can see there are only 6 of them. Several, few, fewer, others, both, many. And if we look at the verb forms here, you can see we're using what would be used for third person plural verb. What do I mean by that? I just mean the verb that we use for the pronoun they. All right. Several have arrived in the mail. We could say they have arrived in the mail. It means virtually the same thing. And thus it's no surprise that the verb form stays the same. Few were still complaining about congestion after the treatment. Now we could make a substitution here and think about, what few might be substituting for, or what you might even think of as what it could be short for. Few people were still complaining. Maybe only a few people were still complaining. But when we stretch out what that subject of the sentence could be, you'll notice we're still using were. All right. I kind of stuck with the irregular verbs for this round, but let's say I take that first sentence and merge it with one we saw earlier. We could say several contain a stethoscope and a thermometer. And we still see it's still the same one that you would use for they. All right. Now, the last one is what gets trickiest because this group of indefinite pronouns relies on the context and the antecedent. The antecedent of a pronoun is just what it would be referring to, right? And we'll see what these references, these referents and these antecedents are like here quite visibly. So again, we only have 6 of these indefinite pronouns. And I wanted to show how the context affects what verb is used and what the antecedent is. First sentence, some blood was collected. Blood is a group from a group of nouns called non-count nouns. So non-count nouns are things that we're not going to break down into individual units to make them into plural forms. These non-count nouns always stay singular or almost always stay singular. There might be unusual situations you'd use a plural. But we look here, some blood was collected. If we have context to know what we could mean by the word some, we could just say some was collected. That is, if the context is clear that the word some is referring to some blood or some milk, some gratitude. I don't know how you collect gratitude, but that's another example of a non-count noun. All right, compare that to the second sentence. Some students wait outside. Now we could replace some students with what pronoun? What personal pronoun? They, right? They wait outside. Becomes perfectly clear that that's what you do. But provided that we have good context to understand the sentence, we could also say some wait outside. So notice, you would think if it was the same rule all the time, it would be some waits outside. But that just doesn't make any sense because with some wait, we are talking about more than one person. And so when you want to use the plural form, we don't break down blood in the same way. So we use the singular. All right, let's move on. And this time we'll look at the same verb, the verb to be, then it should be even clearer. Most water is salty. Most is salty, right? Water, most of the time, a non-count noun. So we use the third person singular form is. We could say it is salty. It doesn't mean the same thing though. Most is salty works better in this context. All right, and finally, the last pair of sentences. Most patients are satisfied. Most are satisfied. I think with sentences like this, once you can expand this sentence by replacing that pronoun with what it stands for, it is a lot easier to figure out what form of the verb to use. And that is an easy test. If you're using any subject pronoun, replace it with its antecedent. Replace it with the word or words that it is standing in for, and use that to test your verb choice, whether singular or plural. All right. I told you we'd look at one other thing that's particularly challenging with pronouns, so let's have at it. Pronouns and their homophones. Oh my goodness. This is something that trips up lots and lots of people. I dare say it trips up everyone at least occasionally. Heaven knows I have to use my spell check to catch this, and I know the rules backwards and forwards, but there's a reason why even someone who's rather adept at this stuff can make common errors. Let's look. And to do that, let's first look at what a homophone is. Homophones are words that sound the same but have different spellings and meanings. Let's check it out. A couple of different sets of homophones. Samantha bought a new pair of slacks. The recipe says to pair 2 apples. I had a pear crisp for dessert. All 3 of those words we pronounce the same way, or nearly all of us do. But they each mean something different. And we look at the second sentence. Did you see the second pair of sentences? Did you see the bear in the meadow? Versus her bare arms and shoulders burned in the sun. Right? In the first, we're talking about an animal. In the second, we're talking about not wearing anything, right? We pronounce them the same, but we spell them differently. That's what is meant by homophones, which literally means it comes from the Greek words for same sound. All right. Now, how this relates to pronouns is, well, we want to consider that homophones pose challenges in writing that are not a problem in speech. Why? I've already said it. It's because they sound the same. Accidentally writing the wrong word because it happens to be a homophone can confuse the reader or even say what you do not intend. So several pronouns are homophones with other words or even with other pronouns. All right. So tripping up on this can mean that your sentence is hard to understand or misunderstood or changes the grammar of the sentence entirely, which ends up changing your meaning as well. Whew, sounds heavy, but fortunately, there are a lot of good memory tricks and rules to help you keep them straight. And this one's probably the biggest one of all. So of course I had to put it first thing. It's ITS versus it's IT apostrophe S. So the first is a possessive adjective. If you remember from our list of personal pronouns earlier, it's without an apostrophe means belonging to it. And it's with an apostrophe means it is. All right, this is so cut and dried and simple. And even though we trip up on it because the words sound the same, the way to remember it is so easy. So let's check it out. Let's see these sentences. Let's see. I'm going to pause a second and see if you can figure out which is the correct one here for each sentence. All right. Let's check out the answers. And I'm going to give you the way to test this. I've kind of touched on it already, but I'm going to elaborate on it. So quite simply, if you can replace the word with it is, you use the apostrophe. Otherwise, use it's without an apostrophe. It could not be more cut and dry than that. Just try replacing it with it is. Does the sentence fall apart? No. Use the apostrophe. Does the sentence, if it does fall apart, don't use the apostrophe. As we can see here, the first sentence, it's going to rain today. Let's replace it's with it is and see if it makes sense. It is going to rain today. Yes, perfect. Let's check the other sentence. Each bag has it is own tag. That just sounds weird and totally ungrammatical. Therefore, no apostrophe for the second. Just replace it's with it is and see whether it makes sense. If it does, use an apostrophe. If it does not make sense, do not use an apostrophe. There you go. That's the rule. All right, another challenging one. And I have to tell you, this one always kind of cracks me up a bit because this one kind of depends on your accent. In many accents in English, these are pronounced the same. But for the way I speak in my accent, these are pronounced differently. And so for me, this is something that's very easy to keep track of in my head, whereas I understand that for a lot of people, it is not. By the way, this does not mean you need to be changing your pronunciation to my pronunciation, right? Everybody has a different accent, and that is totally wonderful and beautiful and okay. And by the way, my accent is a little weird from moving around a lot, so maybe you don't want to copy mine anyway. All right, we're going to have a very similar rule for your and your. Told you I pronounced them differently. But it's a very similar rule to what we saw with its. Your, again, we have a possessive adjective belonging to you. Your, Y-O-U apostrophe R-E, means you are. Guess what? We're going to use the same sort of substitution rule that we used for its. We're just going to replace with you are and see if it makes any sense. So now that you know the rule, let's check. Which one are you going to go with? Try substituting with you are. See if it makes sense. All right, let's check them out. If you can replace with you are, use you apostrophe R-E. Otherwise, use your Y-O-U-R. When we run the test, you are not going to believe this. Bam, makes sense. You apostrophe R-E. Second sentence, did you forget your hat? Did you forget you are hat? I am not hat. How could I forget? Sorry, that was my little joke. Did you forget you are hat? Makes absolutely no sense. Use Y-O-U-R. Okay, we got some more here. And the mnemonics for them are a little bit more challenging, but they're still quite doable. This one's a little harder, but it's to manage when you're writing, but you can see the rule operates more or less the same. Whose, W-H-O-S-E versus whose, W-H-O apostrophe S. Whose, now these are not personal pronouns. Whose, the first one, well, actually, both of these are relative pronouns, which another class that we're not looking at today. Same rule, though. The first is belonging to someone unknown. The second, who apostrophe s, is who is. You know it's going to be a substitution rule by now. Try substituting who is. Let's try it. Let's try the substitution here. Do you know who is car this is? Let's try who is the man wearing purple? All right. When you hear the test out loud, let's see if it makes sense. Let's try that substitution. Let's see if it works. Wow. Do you know whose car this is? Who is didn't work, so we need to use WHOSE for the first sentence. Do you know whose car this is? Second sentence, we do the substitution. Who is the man wearing purple? Ah, that makes perfect sense. So we're going to use the apostrophe S, WHO apostrophe S. Okay. It's going to ramp up a little more because now we have 3 to look at. And because there are 3 instead of rule, we're going to need to run 2 different rules through it rather than 1 to get them figured out. All right. THEIR, belonging to them. Guess what? We have another possessive adjective. So we can see right now, it's the possessive adjectives that tend to trip us up. All right, so that's THEIR. THERE, meaning in that place or situation. There are 3 cats, like that. There, THEY apostrophe RE, just means they are. Okay, with that, we can start thinking, okay, I bet there's going to be one of these rules that should sound a little familiar by now. But again, since we're juggling 3 words instead of 2, we need to run a 2-step process. Let's look at what that process looks like. So these are the 3 sentences that we're going to be testing. They're about to start. There is too much to do. Their cat went to the vet. All right. We're going to learn and apply the rules for each of these. First one, I told you this is going to be familiar. We're going to do a simple substitution with they are. And if we can use they are, that means we use THEY apostrophe RE. Let's start the first sentence. They are about to start. What do you think? They are is too much to do. What do you think? They are cat went to the vet. All right. You've heard the they are rule for each sentence. Let's see how they pan out. Well, it makes sense in the first sentence. They are about to start, but it didn't really make any sense at all for the other 2 sentences. So we have one sentence, bam, out of the way. We need to figure out a rule for the remaining sentences. So we need to rely on the definition of THEIR to help us. I go for that one rather than THERE because THERE has a lot of, it plays into a lot of idioms and it tends to be very abstract. You can easily picture a group of people or a group of things, and it doesn't show up in idioms the same way. So THEIR is the next test we will do for these remaining sentences. We just want to think, is it about a group of people or things owning something? Let's look. There is too much to do. Is there a group of people or things owning something? Not so sure about that. Let's look at the third sentence. Their cat went to the vet. Do we have a group of people or things owning something? I'd say we definitely do. There is a group of people who own a cat in the last sentence. Therefore, we know for that sentence, we're going to use THEIR. So, what do we do with this last sentence? All we have to do is determine that it has failed the first two tests. It cannot be replaced with they are, and it is not talking about a group of people or things owning something. If it fails those two tests, the only thing left is THERE. And there we go. It fails both tests. And like I said, the word THERE shows up in a lot of idioms and contexts. It's sometimes kind of a weird word to understand. If I say there are two cats, you might be asking, where? But if I'm telling a story, I can just say there are two cats and they are happy. But I'm not indicating any particular location. It's kind of abstract. So that's why I avoided that. We'll use our they are rule. We'll use our people or things owning something rule. And then you've got THERE for every other situation and circumstance, no matter how difficult the idiom or phrase it is in may be. All right. But what about APA? We're talking about APA and the APA style manual here all the time. And this may feel like I'm undoing everything that I've been talking about, but there's a reason. So the APA style manual does not allow the use of contractions. Contractions are when we were taking two words and mushing them together with an apostrophe in the middle. So we've been talking about your and whose and their, but if you're writing an APA paper, you need to write those out. You are, who is, they are. And that goes for all the rest. I am instead of I'm. They were, or I'm going to say he is rather than he's, right? Not for APA writing. All right. So why on earth have I been talking about this for over half an hour? APA is not the only place you write. APA papers are not the only things you're writing. If you are writing a letter to someone, contractions like your or their with the apostrophe RE may be entirely appropriate. Let alone messages to supervisors or to instructors or anything. You'll be doing lots of writing in your life, and it's not always going to be something that the APA style manual is appropriate for. Sometimes you just want to be able to have an informal conversation that happens to be in writing. And that's where those contractions come in handy. All right. That is everything that I have for today. I do want to make a point here, and that is I made a couple of references to Nightingale Writing Center and the resources that we have there. I always try to tag in this somewhere because we use these resources so much at Nightingale College. So I'm going to go to, I didn't back up far enough. I'm going to say start at the welcome. And if we go to academic resources, and notice I'm in nightingale.myday.cloud, click Writing Center. And if we look for the tile labeled Fundamentals e-Publications, that is where those handy dandy grammar books I was telling you about, if you want to go to pronouns, well, we got a whole section on it right here. And that even covers the things that we weren't able to get to today. Okay. Thank you very, very much for listening. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. All right. Bye for now.